Hi, thanks for joining us. I'm here with Pierre Black, very long-time dear friend of mine and ex-boyfriend. So we know each other intimately and for many, many years. How many years have we known each other now, Pierre?
I think it's been about 15 years.
Yeah, at least, eh? Good 15
Yeah.
years. So we met in Montreal. He is in Japan now, and I am in Colombia. And we decided to do a little interview, and I thought Pierre would be the right person to do it since he knows me intimately and he could ask some knowledge questions. So we're gonna do a little video just kind of to give you guys a little bit of an insight on my life and my journey so far, and why I'm starting to do the things that I'm doing now, these podcasts, this journaling, these different types of sessions, whatever you want to call them. So I think that's it. Start with that.
Sure.
All right.
Well, I'm really excited to be here doing this interview with you. One of the reasons is because I've known you so long, and you're one of the people that I've watched grow so much over the years. There's been such big change and growth and development over the last 15 years or so since I've known you. Um, so yeah, give me an idea of what you're wanting to accomplish now with your new work.
Well, like you said, because I have grown so much, like me 20 years ago, such a different person, and even 5 years ago, but I've really done a lot of work on myself, and I see a lot of people who are still struggling and who are not interested in meditating every day and going to these retreats. It's a little bit too hippy dippy for them, and I get that, but I don't want them to miss out on this knowledge, on this healing. So my goal is to kind of talk about my experience and hopefully either pique their interest, um, help be a signpost in a certain direction that might enlighten them and go, oh, wow, okay, well, that's interesting. I'm not interested in that, but that's interesting. Tell me more about that. So just kind of help people to heal themselves, because initially it's what we do. We go see people, we go see these healers, and we take these courses and everything, but really the secret is we're doing the work ourselves. Everything that we attend, every book that we read, every video that we watch, they're all just little signposts to our shadows. And that's kind of what I want to introduce to people and help shine light on.
Okay. I think you're touching on something that resonates a lot for me as well. And you touched on that in the beginning. Are you saying that there's a community of people for whom personal growth seems more natural and kind of an obvious path for them? And then there are a number of other communities where it seems less obvious, and the kind of typical path of personal growth and all its like sort of terminology and
Absolutely.
the shoulds and supposed tos of being on that path don't feel right for those
Exactly.
people. Tell me a
Absolutely. I
little bit
totally
more
agree
about
with
that.
that. Well, I would say I was one of those people when I was growing up. I didn't really grow up in a spiritual or holistic. I didn't know any of that. I was I was baptized. I wasn't born Catholic, but I was baptized. And our family wasn't really religious. Every time I would go see my grandmother, she, would go to church on Sunday, and that was the gist of it. Like that was about it. My mom didn't really go to church or anything. She did what we did. We baptized the kid, and go to church every now and then and do the Easter thing or whatever. But that was that. And it wasn't until I got so sick of being so angry that I started to look into something else. And that's when I started to find out a little bit more about Buddhism And that started to talk to me. And I was like, okay, I like that story. And by no means am I, can start talking about what that means. I haven't studied it, but it has piqued my interest enough to read a couple of different books and bring me to meditation, and the Sanskrit brought me to yoga, and all these things. And I feel like I'm on a rant. Yeah, I'm
can
on
I
a
guide you
rant. Like
back?
bring,
Can
yeah,
I
good.
guide you back? Because I
Thank
think
you.
what's interesting about you, what's interesting and special about you is the unconventional path.
Mm-hmm.
It is right. It's very easy. It's very easy for us, for both of us, and for a lot of the people we're involved with. Everyone, we bump into Buddhism a little bit, and we go into Buddhism to varying depths, or we bump into yoga and yoga culture and the spiritual practices and even religion associated with that, and we go into that to various depths. And that's sort of more. That's becoming, in a weird way, it's becoming convention now. It's the conventional path. So you have a lot of sort of, I'm air quotes, normal people that
Mm-hmm.
went down that path, and it's sort of normal now. I think what's interesting about you and special is the unconventional side, and that's why I was starting off touching on like who are we not getting to with these tools.
Mm-hmm.
And tell me about that. Like, what's your mission in that regard? Who are we not reaching, and who do you want to reach?
So people who were not into yoga and who were not into meditation, and who that stuff is like out there, it's like a bit too, hippy dippy. And those are people who come from many different lifestyles. Yeah, people who just, it's too much for them. It's too spiritual. They're not in touch with that. They're not in touch with their emotions. They don't have the vocabulary around it. They don't know how to verbalize it. They don't know what that means. It's a bit too hokey pokey. It's just too much, and that's the people, I guess, that I want to kind of touch.
Just to, if you'll excuse me, you're coming from a place that is kind of marginal and unconventional
Mm-hmm.
and weird and out there to some people. And it's not the, 20 years ago it was weird to be into meditation or be into Buddhism. It's not that kind of weird. It's both of us actually have come from unconventional communities
Mm-hmm.
and marginalized places. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, because I think you are clearly an expert at dealing with some of these alternative communities and bringing the tools that we're talking about today to those communities. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, in my late teens, I started to work in the sex industry. I worked as an exotic dancer, right off the bat, 18 years old. And that led me to finding out about fetishism and BDSM, which I didn't know about. I was never a fetishist. I didn't really know about that world. I fell into it, but was quickly intrigued by it. And went through the whole, became a model, and found out a little bit more about it. And then someone talked about being a professional, and I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, being like a professional dominatrix. And I was like, that's a thing? Like, I had no idea. And this was when I was living in New York, and then I came back to Montreal and looked for a pro dom, a professional dominatrix, and I found one. And thankfully, I actually did a few interviews. I met with a couple of them, and the first one that I had met had been working as a pro dom for 13 years and had a um, um, well run, good reputation, other mistresses working for her. So really, really nice, clean dungeon, and was very much, it was very important for her that there was no sex. So a lot of people confuse that a lot with domination, where it's the same thing as prostitution. They are two different uh, avenues in the sex industry. So for me, I felt like I was really gaining respect, and I was gaining power back, where I was in control for once. I wasn't being abused, and I was in control of my sexuality. And I worked under her for 2 years, and she was an amazing mentor. She gave me books to read and movies to watch, and like the real deal. Then was really careful about where to touch on the body. Don't do that, in a really professional way. She retired and left me at 20. What was I? 22, 23, 22, 23. Running this fetish club with mistresses working under us, the budgets, the bills, the advertising, the website, like all of it. It was a serious company, and I was 22, had no idea what the heck I was doing. But I ran the joint. I ran it for 6 years, and had at the peak, I had 13 mistresses working under me, and all older than me, every single one of them. And I was the head honcho. I was training them. I was the secretary. I had another name when I was the secretary, and I would, do the ads. We hosted parties every month. We hosted private parties, which we had little themes. So we would play little games with people and stuff. And that was something that was always really interesting to me. And that the more I became experienced, the more I developed my role, my character as a mistress, and I realized that I was doing so much more. Like, I see these fetishes can be really cool and fun, but it can be super cumbersome for some people, where if they need it to get aroused, that it can become an issue, especially if they don't have the words around it and the confidence to talk about it. And that's when I started to look into that a little bit more and made that my specialty. And then I started working with couples, and I opened up. I was never really doing that. I started to open to couple, because that's the thing, right? Between couples, they're not communicating. And I actually had John Abbott University or college in Montreal approach me about doing a class. So I would go in and I would teach part of the sexology class and talk about different fetishes and different ideas behind that. And that kept me going a lot longer, because it was a point where I was just like, okay, like, who's in control here, really? And the client's like, well, I want you to dress in latex. I want you to be ready at 2, blah, blah, blah. I want these things. So that started to kind of turn me off. But when I started to do the work and started to connect with people at a different level and realize that I was actually helping them, that brought a whole different level to it. And that was really interesting to me. And I felt like I was doing something.
Can we get away from your resume for a moment and talk more about what's going on underneath? Because I think people really would be interested in knowing what was going on for you. What was your emotional and psychological and spiritual process at that time? Because when I met you around that time that you had the club and all the different mistresses working for you, I also know that you were suffering a lot at that time. There was there was more going on for you underneath. So where did you come from when you were younger? And I know there was a sometimes painful and challenging process of transformation that you came through, and that was around the time that I first met you. So can you give us sorry, that was a big question. I know there's a lot in there, but let's get a little bit deeper than the resume and go into what the process was for you.
So where do you want me to start?
Maybe start when if you're willing to talk about your childhood and your younger years. Maybe start there.
Okay. Yeah, so I grew up at a very young age, right away, around 2.5. Started to get exposed to violence. My stepfather, my mother's husband, was extremely aggressive, physically abusive towards my mom, and verbally and psychologically abusive towards her, obviously, and me as well. And I was 2.5, and that had already begun. At 5, my mom had separated from my father when I was 2, and met him, my stepfather, and we were living across the road, living in a van. My mom would go door to door selling magazines, and I would hang out in the back of the van or be dropped off at different people that would babysit me. And realizing that I was kind of being left to myself, and I didn't have brothers and sisters then. So I became quite independent quite early, and home wasn't a safe place. You know, my mom was abused and doing the best to take care of herself and take care of me, but wasn't in a position of strength. And my stepfather had the position of strength, but I was terrified of him. At around 7 years old, my mom got sick of it and started to run away. And my dad, I don't know if I mentioned that, but my actual biological father passed away when I was 5. So I didn't have that other option to kind of go away to. I was, with my mom and my stepdad. And then, at around 6 or 7, my mom got kind of tired of it and tried to escape. And so we hit the road, and we escaped, and we went to another province. And one day he would just came knocking at the door, and he found us again, and, oh, I'm sorry, I changed, and everything was fine. And then my mom would take him back, and then of course it started again. And this continued like every couple of months, like every 8 months. About we would move, we'd run away, we'd go somewhere else, and then we'd wait for that knock, and the knock always came. He'd always find us, he always came back. And there was a moment where we ended up in Calgary at my mom's sister's fiance, so my sort of uncle-ish, but not family. We ended up at his place, and he had his two sons, my cousins, who I had met for the first time. A nice big house, and they were super welcoming, and they took my mom in and me, and allowed us to live in the house. And we finally got a break from my stepfather, and my uncle started sexually abusing me. And at the time, I remember knowing that it was wrong. I was about 8 years old when it started, and I knew it was wrong. For me, it was better than my mom getting beat up. So I kind of took one for the team, you know. I thought, well, this is not as bad as my mom getting shit kicked out of her all the time. At least she's getting a break, and it is what it is. So I continued to be sexually abused for a little over a year, and then the knock came. Stepfather found us there as well, and somehow convinced my mom to go back with him, and life continued as usual. And it wasn't until I was about 12 and a half, we ended up back in Montreal at some point, and my mom got pregnant. And I couldn't believe it. Like, when she told me she was pregnant, I remember like internally freaking out. Like, are you freaking kidding me right now? But that's what saved her. He wanted a son, and it was the only way he was going to leave her alone. So she got pregnant, thank God, had a son, and had the baby. She was there for a couple of months. And then once he was like off breastfeeding, he ended up taking my brother, and finally left us alone. And it was hard for me to understand how, like, there was an aspect of it where I was like, oh, she's kind of like abandoning her son, and of course that was like, I realized too, that was what he was saying. My stepfather was always like, your mother's abandoning her son, and how could she do that, and everything. And now I see that it was her salvaging herself. It was the only way that she could get away from him. And she had suffered already so much from him, and that was the way that she could just get a break, was to just be like, I can't deal with this.
And maybe for
um,
you as well. Maybe that was that was salvation for you as well.
Absolutely. Um, but I would go back and forth because I was rebel and manipulative, because that's what I grew up with as well. I grew up with lies, and I was master manipulator, just like him. I learned a lot from him. Um, and if I didn't have my way, well, then screw it. I'd go to the next place. If mom would be like, no, 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 you can't do that here, that doesn't work, I'd be like, all right, see ya. And I'd go and stay with stepdad for a couple of weeks. It never really lasted very long because he was way worse, obviously. And it was terrible. And I'm surprised that I ever actually went there, but it was just my way of manipulating things. And he was smart too. He lived the nearest to my school. He lived the nearest to all my friends. That was his way of manipulating me. My mom would live farther, and it was harder for me to have access to my friends, so it was enticing for me to go stay with him. And of course, when I was staying with him, well, I was the nanny, right? I'd take care of my brother, I'd cook, I'd clean, I'd do all the wifey job. So it was a way for him to lure me back in, was by promising me things and be like, oh yeah, you can do, oh, you have that party you want to go to this weekend, don't you? Yeah, come over here, no worries, I'll drop you off. So he would lure me back in with all these things. But it was always short-lived because it was fake, and then I would realize what a horrible monster he was, and I'd run back to my mom. So I did that back and forth as a teenager until I was 17, and then finally was just like, screw this shit, like, you guys are fucked up, I'm out of here. And moved into my own apartment, and wasn't really better. I didn't fall in with the best of crowds. I mean, they weren't terrible. My mom would beg to differ, but it could have been a lot worse. Sure, there were gangs. Yes, there were drugs. But I was already into that in high school. I was 13. I was already smoking weed and drinking, and I had already access to all of that. So they didn't bring me into it. It was just a natural kind of thing. But there was there was a lot of verbal violence. Like they never, I never got physically touched by them. I was actually kind of protected because my man at the time was one of the higher gang members. And I was his main chick, obviously not all of them, not the one, but one of them, one of the many. But I was kind of protected in a sense. So I felt this sense of belonging. I think for the first time, that was my attraction to this gang. It was like I felt like I was part of something. Um, but man, the way we spoke to each other was terrible. I mean, it was yelling, it was dissing each other. It was always like, who could diss the other person more deeply? Like that was the cool thing to do, was like, like slam the other person as hard as you can. And it was tough. I didn't, like, yeah, I was used to being yelled at and stuff, but not like that. Like, it was different. And I remember having a bit, like, feeling sensitive. Like, I remember actually a few times probably like being like, just getting up and going to the bathroom and like crying in the bathroom, being like fucking hurt, like that really hurt, but of course I'd come out and I'd be like, I'd have like my own kind of diss ready back at them or whatever. So I wasn't living my truth, that's for sure. I was a character of myself. But throughout this
And
whole, yeah.
do you know what your truth is at that time? Do you you're
No,
just you're just finding yourself.
I'm
You're just
still
finding
discovering.
you're choosing a situation that is a little bit crazy, and
Hmm.
involves a lot of suffering, but is just a little bit more safe and a little bit more in control, and than your previous situation.
Well, I was on the
So,
other side of things, like I kind of skipped through high school, but through high school I was bullied. I was always at the other end of that spectrum, being bullied and pushed into lockers and all that stuff. So when I got out of that and became part of this family, I was protected, and if anything, they were the bulliers now, and I was on that end of it. I didn't actually, I mean, I never hurt anybody and never was violent towards anybody else, but I was on the other side of it for once. And I realized, like, the theme throughout all of that too is I had to be a tough cookie. I grew up since day 2 years old. What I was taught was that I had to be strong, I had to be tough. The world is a tough place, and if you want to survive, you better toughen up. you know that was probably one of my first lessons. um, be strong, don't cry, you will get eaten. And I
Wow.
lived my life with that lesson for many, many years, many years. Even with them, I never cried in front of them. No fucking way. Even if I was hurt, never. I would always, someone like punched me and I'd be like nothing. And then I'd be like, oh shit, that really hurt, like in private. So I was really good at being who I thought people wanted me to be. I really became a
Or who you
pro at
needed
that.
to be, who you needed to be to survive in a given situation.
Yeah, exactly. Who I needed to be to survive. I was really quick at learning that. Learning who do I need to be? How do I need to act? How do I need to talk? Like, one of the things, if I ask, like, and you would probably agree, one of the things that a word that people would describe me as would be chameleon. I'm a really great chameleon. I can blend into any scene, whether I know it or not. I look at it for a little bit and I'm like, okay, got this. Boom, and I like transform like Mystique, and I blend right in with everybody. I learn the lingo. I talk in the same way. I change the way my maneuver, my hands are, my hair. Like, I can just blend in really well. I'm really good at that. That's one of my skills. But now, doing deeper work on myself, I realize how that's actually been a little bit cumbersome. It's been in realizing and finding my truth and discovering my authentic self. It's tough. I don't know. I have so many different facets, so many different names, so many different ages, like so many different stories. Who do you want
Mm-hmm.
me to be? So
Mm-hmm.
discovering my authentic self has been probably one of my hardest um, journeys.
So tell me about the transition from the time, the sort of gang time with that social group, and the transition into the uh, fetish world, into
Mm,
sex work and dominatrix work. Because I think that that transition point is meaningful, because that's where you got to show off your resilience, and you got to sort of you started using your skills and abilities for something um, that benefited you. um, I observed that you found some power there, and you were directly benefiting yourself, and instead of trying to just save your ass and
mm-hmm,
see where you could be safe.
mm-hmm.
I don't know if that sounds right to you, but tell me a little bit about that transition.
So I think it started with um, the new person. So I changed my name when I was about 9, from my birth name to Veronika. I just came home one day from school and was like, I want to be called Veronika. I don't associate with my birth name, and this is how I want to be called from now on. And 9 years old, first time I did that. Then at around 19, I developed this new name because Veronika was someone who was very shy, and she was a victim, and she had been abused. And this was the whole story around it. And I was sick of it. I was sick of that story. And so I created this other person. And I remember writing it down. I gave her a different name. She was born at 19 years old, had never been abused, was confident, was strong, was in ownership of her own life, you know, like empowered, like all these things that I wrote down that I wanted to be that I wasn't. And I started acting, and I started pretending to be this person. And the exotic dancing really helped that, because you're going up on stage, and it was my stage name actually. So Venetia was my stage name. And I really became this person. So on stage, I was her. I was 100% her, tall, strong. I'm in power. Everyone's down looking at me. I'm the freaking queen, you know? So that really helped build that, create that for real in my life. And then when I shifted over, and I was still in the relationship, I was still with the gang then, as I started to kind of develop this character. And when I fell into the fetish, I remember having this moment of like, how's my man gonna take this? Because he's very vanilla, and you know, Haitians and fetish don't usually go hand in hand.
So this
And
this was a mostly Haitian social group you were
yes,
in.
100% Haitian. I was like, you know, one of the white chicks in the crew. But yeah, everyone was Haitian. All my friends,
One of the very, very few white chicks, from what I understand. Yeah.
And yeah, my best friends were all Haitians, and we were living in the Haitian ghetto, and that's, you know, I grew up with that as a teenager. And and I remember them thinking like, oh, fucking V, she's so freaky. Like what? Like no understanding of what I was doing, no support, just kind of like, this is weird. We don't want anything to do with it. Like, do your thing, whatever. And this was towards, like, I was getting kind of fed up a bit with my man at that time. I knew he was cheating on me, and he wouldn't admit it, even though I was super open. And I was always like, just bring him home so we can share. Like, I remember saying that, you know, I was like, I'm fine, like, just bring him home. But he just couldn't, you know, he just liked the snooping around and the sneaking around. And that's where it got too much for me. And especially when I got into the domination, where I started to kind of take my power back, being the dominatrix, being the one in control, getting this respect from all these clients and these submissives and these slaves. And then just being like, no, like, I'm not going to stand for it, you know, like really shifting, really getting to the other point of, this is a character that I'm playing, and this is me. Like, I merged into this character, and I became this person, to the point of, if someone from school knew me and saw me in the street and would be like, hey, Veronika, I didn't even turn around. Like, I was so disassociated from Veronika. I had become Venetia. I would introduce myself to people who weren't in the scene, to everyone, as Venetia. And I really became her, and I really fully lived her. And then Mistress Venetia, when I started to do the pro dom, and deepen that. And then just like, but it's all ego, you know, like my ego just like really grew and really took over. And what didn't change was the anger. That didn't change. There was no, even though I was more in control, wasn't being abused, felt empowered, felt respected, I was still so angry all the time. And that's what led me to the next path. I don't know if I answered your question. I tend to rant.
Yeah, no, that was good. Um, tell me about the next path, because I remember, so because that was around the time that I
That's when
think
I
we
met
first
you.
met,
Mm-hmm.
and there were there was so much going on at that time, and then fairly frequently there were so many realizations, like sometimes you know who you want to be and what you need to do and what the next moment of healing and transformation will be for you, but you're not there yet. You can identify it. There it
Mm-hmm.
is on the map, and here it comes. Here it comes. And I watched you go through so many of those. So tell me about that time, like finding power and safety, and then you had realizations about that power and that safety. And what happened next? What happened after that?
Well, like I said, for me, when I first started to get it, it was a false sense of power because it was exterior. And it was still, as much as I had become this person, it wasn't me. So it was still parallel. It was still over here, and I was really over here. But I didn't see that. I didn't realize that. And it's when I was faced with this. I mean, I had a burnout. I think that was the first thing. I had a burnout when I was about 22, maybe a little bit later than that. Just trying to
Because
do everything.
you worked hard. I remember like stunned at that time watching somebody, your age with sort of no business
No
training, running
experience.
this big business and working. It felt like 24 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't just like working being a dom, it was working being a manager and taking
Mm-hmm.
care of people who were older than you,
Yeah,
who needed
absolutely.
sort of, wrangling, and also some taking care of, and they needed like training and guidance and organization, and you were doing all of that.
All of it. I was doing all of it. My partner who I started the place with left, and she would take care of that business aspect of it. I was a spokesperson. I was the hot chick who would do the ads and all that stuff, and people would come. And I came up with the ideas for the parties and the themes, and I do the fun stuff, the creative stuff. And then when she left, it was like, oh shit, like I got to do it all. And I had no idea how to do that. I got out of high school, and that was that. I never had any training in owning a business, but I found myself with this business, which I had invested a lot of time and had convinced my mom to invest money in. She lent me a lot of money to get that dungeon going. God bless her. She's amazing. Like, what mom invests in her daughter's dungeon? My mom does, because she's awesome. Um, but yeah, when I found myself with all of that and wearing all those hats, it got to be a lot. And yeah, and there was a point where I actually had a physical burnout. I couldn't, I just couldn't. I couldn't even get up. I couldn't think. I couldn't do anything. A friend of mine offered he was going to Florida for a couple of weeks and offered me to come with him. And I was like, yep, like I got to go. And I left everything to a mistress who had just started working with me, but was the most organized, and I trusted her, but I didn't really know her that much. I had known her for a few months, and I left her everything, including my dog. I was just like, you manage this. Like, I got to go. I can't do it anymore. And I left her the keys. I left her my leash for my dog. And I said, you deal with the business as best as you can. I'm out of here. And I left for a little over 2 weeks, locked myself in the room for 3 days, didn't leave the room, didn't get up to eat, didn't like nothing. I just slept for 3 days. And then finally my friend was like, you got to get out of the room, V. Like, we got to figure out, what's going on with you. And there was just this, I remember this overlying, like, no, it's just like this, a heap of darkness and sadness and this feeling of just, I'm so lost. Like, I just felt it. Veronika kind of came out for a moment and was just like, what's going on? Like, who is this? Who are you? What's going on around here? I don't recognize anything. And I kind of like tapped into that for a second. And it was so confusing because I thought I had it all. I had money, I had all these slaves giving me whatever I wanted, I had free trips wherever I wanted. People were buying me trips to go to New York, to go to Jamaica, and people were buying me $400 corsets and $300 shoes. I had a driver, I had a chef, like whatever I wanted, I had. I'd pick up the phone and be like, dude, get me this. Yeah, okay, done. Like, it was that easy. So that's, what else does a girl want, in a set 22-year-old? That's it. Like, I thought I had it all. I thought I figured it all. And I was so unhappy and angry. And I knew there was something wrong. There was this, something's not right. And I didn't have access to, meditation. I had no idea about that. I didn't know any of that. so I had the burnout, and then I came back. And when I came back, I knew that I had to make a change. And someone from the community, I went and I spoke with him, and he started to talk to me about meditation. And I was practicing a little bit of yoga then. I kind of started doing that a little bit. And so, 10 minutes of meditation here and there in a few classes, but nothing more than that. And he had talked to me about this Vipassana, which is like this 10 hours of meditation a day for 10 days, silent retreat, no reading, no writing, no listening to music, no listening to anything else but the teachings of the teacher, which is 1 hour a day. Men and women separated, no alcohol, no smoking, no meat, no sugar, like just like really strict, and everything I wasn't, just like complete opposite of the way I was living my life at that moment. And so he talked about it, and I was like, man, that's nuts. Like, you did that? And he's like, yeah, I did it. It was super transforming. And, he spoke to me about his experience, and I was blown away that was existed and that he had done that. And he said, you should try it. Like, here's this tape. He gives me this cassette tape and 30-minute meditation on each side. And I got home super motivated and did the half an hour meditation. And then the next day did another half an hour meditation. And I think I did a total of like 3 times, like 90 minutes of meditation. And in my moment, because I'm an extremist and very spontaneous, I went on the website and looked into the Vipassana thing, and filled out the whole form, and put myself on the waiting list. I applied to go, and there was no room, and so I put myself on the waiting list, and then forgot about it. Never touched the
near Montreal, right? This was near just outside
this was
Montreal?
in Sutton, yeah, so about an hour and a half away from Montreal. And then I forgot about it. I just like went on in my life and kept doing my thing. And it's probably a month later, more or less, I was actually in Baie-Comeau up north visiting my grandmother. I think we were on the way back, or we were just about to leave. And I got a call, and it was the Vipassana Center. And they were like, yep, so we have an opening. You have to tell us now. The course starts in 48 hours. Okay, let's do it. So I said, yeah, we left, we drove back. My mom was super supportive once again, and drove me back in time, packed my stuff. The next day I was with one of my drivers on my way to the center with 90 minutes of meditation experience in my life. End up going to this 10-day meditation retreat. And the second I got there, like I remember feeling this like sense of being a fraud, like, what are you doing here? Like, you had no business being here. You have no idea what you're putting yourself into. Like, and I didn't, I had no idea, but there I was. So we start the day at 4:30 in the morning, hit the gong, get up, go to meditation. I usually get up at like 10, 11, like I'm a night person. I'm partying at night and smoking weed and drinking booze and doing domination. Like that's my jam, and here I am waking up at 4:30 in the morning to go meditate. And of course, all I'm doing is like nodding off. I'm just like tired, falling asleep. Every hour of meditation, I'm just like basically falling asleep, waking myself back up, getting annoyed, getting frustrated, opening my eyes, looking at the people who look all like perfectly zen into their meditation and flowing. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, this is not working for me. So fast forward like 3 days of this. And the third day, I'm just like, I'm raging. Like, I'm just furious. I'm more angry than I was when I got here. I'm like, this is bullshit. Like, not for me. And I go and I speak to the teacher, and I'm like, you know what? Super cool place. I think what you guys are doing is awesome. It's just not for me. I'm gonna opt out. And teacher was like, okay, no problem. We understand. Will you finish the day and leave tomorrow morning? And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll finish the day, but tomorrow morning, like, I'm out of here. And that day they introduced the second level of the meditation. So the first one is basically you're just focusing on your nose and the inhale and the exhale. And then on this third lesson, there's a lesson every day, but then they say, okay, well, this time take a position and try to hold it for an hour. Like if you have an itch, don't scratch it. If you're in pain, go into it. Like don't move, just go into it and breathe and drop in. And challenge accepted. I choose the most submissive position one can take, which is really interesting. And I still don't know why I did that. I guess I really needed to, break it. But so I go on my knees with my arms behind my back, like super painful position on my knees, which instead of sitting cross-legged, I'm like on my knees, which is terrible. Super painful position, but that's what I took. And I kept it for an hour, didn't break it, and went through some of the most excruciating pain. Like it was really, really, really painful. But I managed to go in. I really managed to drop in like I've never dropped in before. And I went to the center of the pain and it became vibration. There was a moment where I could not feel the pain anymore. All I could feel was vibration, and I could feel like every molecule of my body, like I could feel that we're not solid, and I could feel the energy and the air going through me, and I was just I was one. I was just one with everything. And I had no conception of that. Like what, now I can say that, but then I didn't have the words to kind of explain that. I had no idea what I was experiencing. It was like euphoria was the only thing I could probably say about it. And in that moment, I remember seeing my shell, the shell that I had built around myself, and each layer of protection. Every time I felt the need to protect myself, it had created this layer. All the abuse, these layers, and I could see all these layered different colors, and they were like, it was like a dinosaur shell. It was so thick, and what's the word I'm looking for? I have obscure, it's not the right word, but just like opaque. Like there was no light coming in. There was none. And when I realized that, I think it was the first moment that I had compassion for myself. First moment I had ever experienced compassion for myself. And at that moment when I experienced that compassion of like, oh, like you poor girl, like you went through a lot, and it's okay, and I'm here for you. There was this crack in that shell. I saw this, and I remember like hearing it, like just this crack. And then this light came in, and I realized that why all this anger and everything that I was like building and stuck into this rock that I had built around me. I was not letting anyone near me. I was so protected, overprotected, that there was no way that love could enter. There was no way that light could enter because I was so shielded. I was so guarded. And that's where my sadness came from. That's where my anger came from. And then, yeah, and then that crack happened. The light came in, the gong, and I was drenched. Like my shirt was completely soaked, half with sweat and half with tears. I remember my face was like glistening with tears. And once the gong hit, I like ran out of that room after like slowly like moving my shoulders out of place. I ran out of the room into the forest and cried like the deepest cry from the depths of my soul. Like it was like I've never heard myself cry like that. Even to this day, I've never cried like that again. And it was just like all the hurt had just like come out like in that moment. All the pain that I had suffered, everything had just like come out in that moment. And then I like went back and fell on my back and just like laughed, like just like like just this release, and this was the first, and I'd say probably to this day, maybe it's because it was the first, it felt like it was the biggest, but I feel like it was like the biggest release that I've experienced. And needless to say, I mean, even the teacher, like she saw, and then I came back to the other lesson after, and she just looked at me and went like that, and I was like, like we're good, you know. And I stayed and I toughed out the next 7 days and did the whole 10 days. And it was huge. It was massive. And that was the first really big transformation that started this journey. And yeah. Yeah, it was big. That was a big one.
Yeah.
That was a big one. And that was the first glimpse, I guess, back at Veronika. And that was the day I decided I was going to work back towards becoming Veronika. And not long after that, I retired from being a pro dom. I quit the dungeon, um, and started to work towards figuring out who I was really. You know, I started working towards becoming my authentic self, which I'm still doing. You
Right.
know, I'm still doing that work. And that was like about that 15 years ago is when I met you. I met you right after the Vipassana. I had met you
Right.
before the Vipassana, but we knew each other in the scene as our characters. You know, I knew you, Pierre Black, doing your freaky deaky shows.
Yeah.
And you knew me as Mistress Venetia, the, you know, pro dom with the dungeon and
Yeah.
everything. And and you are the person who has helped me the most, to absolutely. No, I mean, you pinpointed, you saw that I was in this consistent state of depression. I didn't
Mm.
really see it because for me it was normal. You know, well, this is life. Like, of course, my life is shit. You know, I've been abused, been my whole life. And what do I had a shitty childhood. Like, what is there to be happy about? You know,
Yeah.
and you nailing that and being like, no, like this is a state of depression. Like we can do something about this. And changing my nutrition, like getting off the white bread and the pasta, which was all I was eating. I was eating bread, peanut butter bread, cereal, bars. Like that was my staple. That was my staple food.
Right.
White bread,
Right.
peanut butter, cereal, and bars. Like that's all I would
Right.
eat, you know?
Right.
So changing my diet, first of all, and then bringing supplements into my life and the change of life. I started working out a little bit more as well, and got out of the BDSM, which wasn't a negative thing, but it started to weigh me down. It was the business aspect of it that was too much. So that's what was negative and was too much for me, and that's why I retired from that. Um, and I remember for the first time, I was 27 was the first time I said I love my life ever. You know, it was the
Mm.
first time I was like, wow, like I love my life. I'm happy. Yeah, I had never said that before in my life.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a big moment. That was a
So
big
what were you
moment.
doing? How were you transitioning away from basically sex work and the business surrounding sex work? And what were you doing? What was the what were you doing instead?